Hi, everyone. I am Mark Zinkowitz, editor for Seed World Canada, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm happy to be your host, and I'm excited to dive into a conversation that is more relevant than ever: how strategic partnerships are reshaping the seed and cereal landscapes here in Canada and beyond, as global trade patterns continue to shift and new opportunities emerge. The way we collaborate across the agri-food sector is evolving, and it's evolving pretty fast. So today we're going to explore how recent trade missions and innovative partnerships are not only opening doors for Canadian crops on the world stage, but are also transforming how our industry builds growth, resilience, and value from field to shelf. So whether you're a retailer, a breeder, agribusiness professional, a policy leader, I'm hoping you'll walk away from this session with some actionable insights and some good real world examples of partnership models that are already making an impact across the agri-food chain. So let's get started. So first, I want to thank our webinar sponsor, CCAN, for their support. If you have a question for any of our speakers, you don't have to wait until the end of the webinar. You can type it into the comment box at any time. Just let us know which speaker you're directing the question to, and we will get to your question at the end of our webinar. But again, you don't have to wait until the end. Type it into the comment box, the chat box, at any time. Though the webinar is being recorded today, as always, and a recording of it will be available on our website, seedworld.com, in the coming hours. We have several speakers today. I just want to bring them to the stage and introduce everyone. We have Jeff Reed, he's General Manager for CCAN. Hello, Jeff. We have Lauren Cummin. She is Policy Director for Seeds Canada. Good day, Lauren. And Leif Carlson. He is Director of Market Intelligence and Trade Policy for Cereals Canada. Hello, Leif. How are you, sir? Good to
Very
see
well,
you.
Mark.
Now, we also have Michael Harvey. He's Executive Director for the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, but he couldn't be on live with us today, so I'm going to play a short pre-recorded chat with Michael. And I also have a special guest, our former Ag Minister, Cody Blois, who I did an interview with this past Friday. Of course, big news this morning, as we all know, cabinet shuffle in Ottawa. So Cody is no longer our Ag Minister. However, we talked pretty generally about trade policy, and so his comments are still very relevant. So even though he is not our Ag Minister today, he was on Friday. So we're going to hear from Cody as well. But I want to kick things off with Jeff. So Lauren and Leif, we will come back to you shortly. So hang on the line. Do not go anywhere. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just curious, I have this great picture here that I got from a video that's on the front page of the CCAN website. If you go to the CCAN website, ccan.com, you can view this video. Jeff, I'm just curious, can you tell us what's going on here?
Well, thanks, Mark. I thought maybe we'd get away without having to explain that video, but it did get a lot of hits, actually, and it was just we were kind of going out of our way to explain how CCAN is truly Canadian, and I have a little maple syrup operation, and so I made this little rant up in the sugar bush one day. And it was really just for a couple of retailer kickoffs, but it kind of went a little bigger than I anticipated.
It went viral, Jeff. So congrats on going viral. That's a big thing these days. If you can go viral, you got it made. So
right on.
It's a great video. So yeah, go to ccan.com. You can watch it. I know Jeff seems to be a little self-conscious about it, but it's a great video. Go and give it a viewing. But Jeff, this Canadian theme is a big deal for CCAN right now. This is something else I took from the CCAN homepage, made in Canada. It's in our genes. And so obviously there's a lot of patriotic feeling at CCAN. And so this is what we want to talk about today is some of these partnerships and concerns that people have surrounding this issue. And I just wanted to start, Jeff, with the elephant in the room, economic concerns. How have CCAN's customers, how have your clients been affected, and where has CCAN, felt the biggest shift over the last couple of months as, all of these things from trade to tariffs and, the economy, everything else, it's been dominating headlines for how many weeks now? And then where has, CCAN seen the biggest shift?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and thanks again, Mark, for the opportunity just to share some thoughts today. I think we're fortunate in the seed industry, and particularly for CCAN, we're primarily in the cereal market in Western Canada. And I would say, for the most part, we've been pretty well insulated from a lot of the impacts. Probably more so than, say, canola, that's maybe facing a little more uncertainty in some of those export markets. But I think everybody, like it or not, we're facing that degree of uncertainty in the industry now, just not knowing exactly where things are going to go with tariffs and so on. So that really has an impact, particularly on capital investments going forward. But again, in terms of the seed industry, I think we're relatively well insulated, and particularly in cereals, because we do have such diversified markets for Canadian exports. So that's, we've really been thankful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, seed is a little bit more insulated than other industries. But as I'm going to talk about with Lauren in a bit, there's a lot. Seed does move over the border. I think it's something like $500 million worth of seed moves from Canada to the United States each year, and roughly the equivalent, about $500 million of seed moves from the United States into Canada as well. So there is, quite a bit of trade that goes on that way too. But like you say, seed does have the benefit here, especially cereals, of being a little more cushioned from that impact. But I'm just curious, how does all this change the way you think about risk and resilience? And there's been so much talk about Canadian self-reliance, and that we should rely on ourselves more and be more self-sufficient. Like what for you, like, does that look like in the seed sector, this idea of self-reliance?
Yeah, so in the seed industry, we really do depend on collaboration. Not only within Canada but internationally, particularly when you're looking at diversifying your sources of germplasm and so on. So, really, I don't think those relationships are probably going to change that much, regardless of the political climate. I think everybody that's in the seed space is very much, for the most part, into that sort of collaboration. So we feel pretty good about that longer term. I think the risk, though, that we really need to be cognizant of in Canada and thinking about is that, what happens today is going to have a big impact on us 10, 15 years out. And so we know that, any kind of short circuiting that happens in our plant breeding programs today or over the next couple of years here, that's going to have real long-term impacts. And I think the reality is, particularly in the cereal space, I think over the last 15, 20 years, really, Canada's been on a pretty good run here. When you look at, from a number of different metrics, but if you look at the use of certified seed, we've seen generally a very positive trend there. And, when you look at the productivity of cereals, like take wheat, for example, in Canada, really outpacing a lot of other crops. And not only that, if you compare us to the US, we were thinking a number of years ago, especially when the wheat board was disappearing and so on, we thought, there's going to be all these US genetics flooding into Canada. And in actual fact, that's never really materialized. We've probably, been sending far more of our genetics into the US just because we've had a real competitive advantage there. And I think that's been, driven largely by those public-private partnerships, kind of coming back to kind of the theme of today about what's been working. When you look at the universities, the Crop Development Center, AEFC, and so on, I think we've really built some exceptional levels of resilience there. And I think we just need to acknowledge that and then consider how do we further build on those successes here in Canada.
Yeah, well, when it comes to what's working and what's not working, and that's a part of this is sort of, us looking in the mirror and figuring out, okay, like what can we do better? And I'm curious what it means, like from your seat at CCAN, like are we actually walking the talk when it comes to, say, strengthening domestic IP and plant breeding capacity? I mean, what sort of work do you think we might have to do there?
Yeah. So great question. I would say yes and no. I think PBR in Canada has worked tremendously well, to help kind of get things going and enable things like value creation and so on. Um, Certainly, we are much more dependent on those types of tools like PBR in Canada than a lot of countries are because of our dependence on, for example, cereals and other self-pollinated crops being such a big part of our acreage. But I think in the absence of really leveraging up that some form of value creation going forward, we're going to remain, for the most part, dependent on those public-private partnerships in terms of spurring on the programs that we have here. And that's not something I don't think we should be apologizing for. That's not a bad thing. When you look at what drives a lot of industries out there, quite frankly, they are dependent in a big way on those public-private partnerships. And, I think over the last number of years, we may have been, in some cases, almost overly preoccupied with trying to stimulate additional research and investment, where we have some really great programs that are really pumping out exceptional products already for us here in Canada. So again, not something we need to apologize for, but I do think, for example, in the case of AEFC, we really need to be concerned that if we start eroding that infrastructure there and that base that we have, that's something that's very difficult to replace longer term. So I think we just really need to come together as industry and public sector and say, okay, what are our priorities here? How do we preserve this infrastructure that we have that we're so dependent on, be it from the public or private sector?
Jeff, before I let you go, what's the key message you want people watching the webinar today to walk away with when it comes to, building a smarter, more self-sufficient Canadian seed system that still plays well globally?
Yeah, I think really we just need to not just try to emulate what other regions like Australia or the US have done, because in actual fact, we have some huge strategic advantages here in Canada. You look at that huge network of seed growers and processors who have, in many cases, on an individual basis, invested millions in their operations. And that's really a huge asset that needs to be leveraged to increase the productivity of agriculture in Canada. So I think that, the fact that we've got groups coming together from up and down the value chain, willing to work together to fund research programs, I think that's really a kind of a made in Canada solution, and something I think we should be really proud of as Canadians.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great insights, Jeff. Thank you. Don't go anywhere. Hang on the line. We're going to do a little Q&A at the end. So we will return to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.
Now, I want to switch over to our next speaker, Cody Blois, our former ag minister. I talked to him on Friday. Like I say, he was still our ag minister at the time, but we live in a world that changes very, very fast. And so as of this morning, Cody is no longer our federal Ag Minister. That honor now goes to Heath MacDonald from Prince Edward Island. And so I'm going to have to ask Heath to maybe be on our next webinar. But I want to thank Cody for giving his time on Friday to speak with me. We spoke pretty generally about trade and trade policy, and so his insights are still really relevant, even though he's not our ag minister anymore. So our chat was about 10 minutes long. So we will hear from Cody right now. So sit back and enjoy. Today.
Hi, Mark. Doing well here in Halifax on a beautiful Friday afternoon and looking forward to talking all things seeds and agriculture.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. I know what a busy time it has been for you indeed. And we are doing this interview on Friday, May 9th. Coming up on Monday, I believe there's going to be there'll be a new cabinet announced, possible cabinet shuffle. But as of right now, you are our federal ag minister. Thank you for the work that you do. And during the election, specifically during the ag leaders debate, that we all tuned into, you said agriculture will not take a back seat. It will help drive Canada's economic strategy. What does that actually look like? What's that first policy lever that the Liberal Party is planning to pull when Parliament resumes later this month?
So, look, obviously, when the Prime Minister asked me to take on this role before the dissolution of Parliament, one of the things he said to me is he said, "Look, I'm asking you to serve in this capacity for two reasons. One is, the file, because I had been the chair for a number of years. I've been on the committee ever since I was a parliamentarian in 2019. But he also said, I really see agriculture as being a foundational pillar of our economic strategy to have the strongest economy in the G7, which I think is going to be." That'll be welcomed all across the industry. Agriculture is, approximately 150 billion to our economy every single year. 1 in 9 jobs in this country are tied to agriculture, agri-food. So this is big business. It's something that stitches our country together from British Columbia to Newfoundland, Labrador, everywhere in between, urban and rural. My goal, if I have the privilege of continuing to stay in this capacity, is to really drive change in a few different areas. And when we say agriculture, each commodity group is going to have its own consideration, right? So it would be hard to give necessarily complete, fulsome answer to, how we drive that sector. But one of the things I'm going to be really focused on are the things that we can do that don't cost money, that drive competitiveness and innovation. So you would have saw before Parliament, CFIA agreed to an entire package of measures that we can take on red tape reduction, innovation in regulatory agility. Without sharing too many state secrets, you're going to see more of that. That's more of what I want to get accomplished in this role. That can be through PMRA, that can be through CFIA, because as you know, farmers and stakeholders, it's not always necessarily about big billion-dollar programs. It's how can government reasonably facilitate and help drive in a regulatory sense some of the outcomes that we need, and to also drive innovation in the sector. So, I know we can talk about the seeds modernization regs, some of the things, but there's a whole focus there. The second piece is really about Canada feeding the world. We are one of the largest agri-food exporters in the world, particularly when you think about Western Canada, massive commodities that are able to ship all around the world. We have to make sure that there's the proper trade infrastructure in place, port infrastructure, rails. These are all things that we have to focus on. And I think there'll be an entire strategic element about how we continue to feed the world. The last piece is a little bit closer to home. How do we build up regional capacity? I come from beautiful Nova Scotia. Secondary processing is extremely important in this country. We lag the United States and the Europeans in terms of investment in that space. I don't know if I necessarily have a magic bullet to change that, but the fact that we're going to talk about that and we're going to do more in that space, I think signals that we're serious. And those would kind of be the big three pillars. But we could talk about a whole bunch, but that's some of the things that I would want to be tackling.
Well, you mentioned regulation, and now during the Ag Leaders debate, topic of CFIA came up. That's a big part of seed regulatory modernization is working with CFIA to modernize our seed regulations. And as regulators are known for caution. It's a part of their job, but regulators can also become catalysts for innovation, which CFIA does all the time. I'll point to its approach to gene editing that recently made headlines. You promised during the debate to direct CFIA to streamline processes. And as far as seed regulatory modernization goes, what What do you see as the biggest opportunity to help our sector really innovate?
The intention has to be, how do we utilize the science and information sharing from other trusted jurisdictions to inform and expedite our own process? It's not about getting rid of regulations. It's not about not having public policy values around environment and health and public safety, but we have to be able to put a food security and economic lens on every decision we make at the same time. And the future of where agriculture is going is going to be premised off innovative seeds that are able to kind of meet the moment, so to speak. So my focus and our focus and how we'll try to shift things is making sure that that is part of the way in which we approach regulation. You kind of said it best, using it as a catalyst, not an inhibitor. We don't have to compromise our public policy values, but there's ways that we can expedite processes and create the certainty that the business community needs to want to drive innovation and to make sure that we have registrations in this country. It's not a given that companies are going to want to come register in Canada. We have to be competitive in that space. And I think, respectfully, for far too long, we have not put enough of a lens on that. I intend to make that a change with the help of our regulatory agencies, of course.
Yeah, well, and we need all the help we can get. This webinar today is about relationships, and you're committing, I believe you said 200 million to boost domestic processing, but you also called that just a start. What's the moonshot vision here, so to speak? Are we talking bolstering food sovereignty, scaling up globally, or is it, a balance of both?
I think it has to be looking out both ends of the telescope at the same time. Like I said, depending on where you're at in the country and what commodity group you're involved in, you're either looking again to markets all around the world because your commodity is one that is exported and globally traded, versus there's other commodities that are more internal focused, and it's about building up maybe secondary processing to drive demand internally. So it's got to be both at the same time. The reason why I said 200 million is a good start. I'll go back to what I just started on. We do lag the Europeans and the Americans on that investment in secondary processing. We could probably have a university course as to why those conditions are the case. My job will be to engage with stakeholders, with folks that are involved in secondary processing in agri-food to say, okay, what are the conditions that you need to see? What is the signal you need to see for us to do more in this space? And $200 million, look, there's always going to be finite amount of resources in the public sector. Government cannot be leading. We have to catalyze private investment. The Prime Minister has been very clear about this. The job is to use a finite amount of public resources to draw in private investment. Mark, there is plenty of global capital that can be expended and invested in Canada if we set the conditions right. The question is, how do we do that? How do we make sure that we set them? How do we work with stakeholders and really signal that Canada's open for investment? We want to see more of this type of behavior and then catalyze that private investment. I said during the ag debate, there are examples of global venture capital that will be looking for countries to invest in and also have their management company in. The Netherlands have a great model where they invest. I think it's maybe for every dollar of public investment, there might be 10 of private. So it leverages private capital. Those are the utilities that we have to be very smart in to make sure that we're getting the metrics of using every public dollar as efficiently as possible and also drawing in the private capital. Sometimes that's co-investment programs that we're kind of mentioning or talking about now. Sometimes that's regulatory changes. Sometimes that's relationships. You go back to the call, maybe there's going to be someone on this call that's going to say, well, look, it sounds as though things are pretty promising in Canada. I want to come invest. Francois Philippe Champagne used to talk about CEOs will have my phone number. Folks that want to invest in Canada in agriculture, they'll have my phone number as well. They can reach out and we'll be accessible.
Before I let you go, Minister, from interprovincial barriers to Indo-Pacific trade, you've really laid out an ambitious agenda with regard to market access. And if there's that one thing, that single biggest friction point right now that's holding us back from competing globally, what is it, and how fast do you think we can possibly fix it?
Canada's well positioned. We are the only G7 country that has a trade agreement with every other G7 country in the world. But I think it would be fair to say the world has fundamentally changed in terms of the geopolitics. Frankly, a little bit about how the U.S. administration is looking to rewrite the playbook on their economic relationship with countries around the world. But we're also seeing geopolitics and the conflicts that are playing out that do have an impact on food and the movement and export of goods. Look, We're not going to control that. The Prime Minister has been very clear we will play into external events, but we have to control what we can control here at home. I think it's fine to have an agreement, but if you don't actually have market access, then it's only as good as the piece of paper that it's written on. And it's about actually having the boots on the ground. I've had the conversation with CFIA President Paul McKinnon on this. I give a tip of the cap to the folks at CFIA. They do very, very important work, and particularly on phytosanitary and engaging with regulatory agencies in other countries that we're looking to get market access to. We have to have that resourcing on the ground. We have to make sure that we are being streamlined in how we go about that. So I think it's two things. I think it's about working with countries that undoubtedly that their food processing standards would be very similar to ours, finding a way to have basic amounts of resources on that relationship because it's a very trusted one, and we know that the science and the process is very similar to Canada's. And in countries that we don't have as much familiarity on in terms of their regulatory agencies, making sure that they have both a trust in the quality of our exports, but also it's a two-way relationship in terms of potential imports into our country. So I think it's really putting a focus and emphasis on regulatory agility and also making sure CFIA has the resources on the ground alongside the political relationships to say, we're going to pave the road for you to do work. Business will do business. It's not our job. Yes, we'll be there to help work with the agri-marketing initiatives. We'll be there with commodity groups, but business will take care of business. We have to level the playing field and making sure that the road is paved for them to get their relationships in and get the product moving.
Mr. Blois, great insights. Thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And thank you very much to Cody for that. Looking forward to watching Cody as he continues his role in Parliament as a Nova Scotia MP. Great insights. I really liked, how he's talking about strengthening what we have here at home, but also forming those relationships abroad, which are very, very important. So it's a balance of both, as they say. So next, I want to bring to the stage Leif Carlson. Hi, Leif. How are you today?
Hey, Mark. I'm very well.
Good. Thank you for being with us. Now, Leif, you're Director of Market Intelligence and Trade Policy at Cereals Canada. And I have a photo here on the screen. You recently went as part of a delegation to Washington, D.C. In the big photo here, you are on the very left-hand side, and next to you is Michael Harvey from Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, who we're going to hear from shortly. The both of you were there together. But I want to talk about that, but also a big announcement that Cereals Canada made a few weeks back. The Manitoba government made a substantial funding commitment. There's Premier Wab Kinew, made a substantial funding commitment to an initiative that you're undertaking called the GATE Initiative, or Global Agriculture Technology Exchange. Here we see the Premier when he was making that announcement at your headquarters in downtown Winnipeg. And on the left, we see an artist's rendering of what the GATE headquarters could possibly look like. So that's very exciting, something I want to talk about as well. But talking about Washington, now, you went to D.C. with Canadian agri-food leaders, and just curious, what was your key takeaway from those meetings, and how did those meetings help strengthen Canada's trade position when it comes to cereals?
Well, thanks for the questions, Mark. And yeah, there's been a lot going on in the cereal sector and in ag overall over the past couple of months. I mean, the visit to Washington was quite important. With the group from the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, we're representing cereals at Cereals Canada, but our colleagues represented a lot of the other parts of Canadian export-focused agriculture, and we wanted to go down to the U.S. and first and foremost be seen and tell our story. There's a lot of agri-food trade between Canada and the U.S. In the cereal sector, the U.S. is one of our largest customers for all of the different cereal crops that we cover. So wheat, durum, barley, and oats. But at the same time, perhaps that's taken for granted and is not really thought about. But over the past decades, we've developed these integrated supply chains between Canada and the US. And what that's doing is that's supporting farm incomes in Canada, farm incomes in the United States, as well as supporting processing on both sides of the border. So when we're going down there to talk to the US, we want to make sure they understand that Canada is a big part of their food security, and really talk about the different ways that benefits US stakeholders. I think in the cereal sector, a great example of that is in oats. I was raised on a grain farm in east central Saskatchewan. Where I grew up, we can't grow corn or soybeans, but we can grow hard red spring and oats. A farm in Nebraska might be the opposite way, where they're really well suited to growing crops like corn and soybeans. So they can grow those crops and do what's best for their farm. The farmers in Canada can grow what's best for our farms. We can trade those products, maybe bringing some corn in to southern Alberta for feed, and bringing oats from Saskatchewan down into the Midwest of the U.S. for being processed into breakfast cereals and food bars. That's a benefit for farmers. It's a benefit for processors, and it's really a benefit for U.S. customers. We want to make sure those messages are understood by U.S. decision makers.
Now, in regards to the GATE initiative that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Cereals Canada has described this as the interface between Canada and the world. And I'll just give people a brief update. So the GATE initiative is all about you basically building a new headquarters in downtown Winnipeg, not just for Cereals Canada, but a bigger facility that's going to be called the Global Agriculture Technology Exchange. And so for those who are maybe just hearing about this for the first time, what role will this play in preserving and growing market access for Canadian cereals?
Absolutely. The work that Cereals Canada and organizations that came before us have been doing has been going on for over 50 years, and a big part of what we do it relates to the technical aspects of wheat and cereals, milling and processing. And for a crop like wheat, as I often say, wheat isn't wheat. And what I mean by that is the use of a hard red spring wheat is different from a soft red winter wheat or a soft white wheat. And we, as in Western Canada, largely growing durum and hard red spring wheat, we want to make sure that our customers understand how to get value from that wheat. And when we talk about the GATE as being an interface, it's not really about the building, it's about what goes on inside that building. So my colleagues at Cereals Canada, I have the pleasure of working with expert millers, expert bakers, expert producers of end products. And these people speak the same language as our customers. So we're really interfacing out of our space in Winnipeg with the 80 or so countries that buy Canadian cereals. And another way that we interface is through building relationships, and that includes in-person, face-to-face relationships. Just last week, we had a group of millers in from Indonesia. They're coming to Canada to learn about what agriculture means, to learn more about the types of wheat that we grow, to understand how they can use that wheat in a way that gives their company the most value. And what that does is really demonstrate why Canadian wheat's worth paying for. More money from the sales of Canadian ag products brings that value back to the value chain and benefits everyone from the grain companies to the farmers to seed growers like that would be represented on this webinar. So those are some examples of why GATE matters.
Yeah, well, like you say, the seed is, me being editor for Seed World, I mean, seed is such an important connection for us. And then talking about, seed quality and yield, I mean, the real magic happens when, those traits align with global needs, right? Like when plant breeders hit on something that just has this there's this demand globally for it, right? You get that critical mass and it just fuels tremendous growth. And I'm just curious, how's Canada uniquely positioned to deliver on both fronts? Like, we're talking about resilience here at home, but also being reliable abroad. How can we deliver on that when it comes to cereal breeding?
Well, I think, looking at it from both of those perspectives is very important, and I think that that we've done a very good job at accomplishing that. When it comes to the resilience at home, it's really been incredible, as to what our breeding community has been able to do, and farmers have been able to do in terms of continuing to grow high quality cereals. Again, I'll look at wheat and what's happened with the ability to get better yields out of, for example, the CWRS class, and being able to do that is a real benefit. It's a real benefit for our farmers because they're able to get better yields and have better economic outcomes. It's good for the value chain in terms of, volume matters when it comes to earning revenue, and lastly, for customers, they want to see consistent supply, and Canada's been able to do that. It wasn't that long ago that we had the drought of 2021, where it was a drought all the way from the Rockies to Winnipeg here, and yet, the combination of seed genetics and farmer know-how, that we were able to still grow a much better crop. And when I compare it with a generation ago, and some of the outcomes that we saw in the late 80s, it's really humbling to see how well we've done on the resiliency. And at the same time, all the while maintaining quality for the type of wheat that Canada sells, whether it's hard red spring for baked products out of Western Canada, or the soft red wheat that's grown in Southern Ontario. These wheats are designed to work for customers and to make food, and to see our breeding community both be able to expand yields while protecting quality. That's a big outcome, and I think that's such an important part of what's driven Canada's ag success. Former Minister Bloise talked about the economic impact of agriculture. For the cereal sector, we're generating almost $69 billion of value for Canada each year.
Before we wrap up with Michael and Lauren, Leaf, one more question for you. Cereals Canada has many trade missions that you do around the world. I'm just curious, what's one or two recent market opportunities that make you feel really excited and optimistic about the future of Canadian cereals?
Well, in general, being able to visit customers, in their home mills and in their home countries, especially coming out of the trade disruptions that came from the pandemic, and the concern about food supply that was front of mind when the Black Sea conflict started, was the sense from customers that they want Canadian wheat and barley and oats. They want Canadian ag products, and then that's appreciated. That's always a real source of support and a reason to continue to be optimistic. Specifically, 2024, I think, was in a lot of ways a very good year for Canadian cereals trade and for exports. For me, one important example is Indonesia. Indonesia is one of our largest importers of wheat from Canada. They buy bread wheat as well as durum wheat. And last year, Canada and Indonesia concluded negotiations toward a trade agreement. And I think this is a real example of in a market like Indonesia, wheat has been traded for a long time. It's sort of one of the commodities that brought us together. So to see the trade negotiations with Indonesia proceed and be concluded, that brings more of the Canadian economy to have access to that market. To see how the rules of trade and the dispute settlement provisions around things like sanitary and phytosanitary regulations come into place. I think these are all great examples of where trade works and what can be accomplished when you have two economies that recognize the benefits of trade and put together an agreement that should bring success for us all. This is a great example for Canadian agriculture and for the cereal sector about why we're strong and valued internationally.
Thank you so much for your insights, Leif. Don't go anywhere. We're going to do a Q&A, so hang on the line.
Thank you very much.
Now, just going back to that photo I showed earlier, Leif was in Washington with Michael Harvey. I did a brief chat the other day with Michael. He couldn't be on live with us, but I just want to talk with Michael now about the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance and some of the opportunities being facilitated there. And then we'll wrap up for the day with a chat with Lauren Cummin from Seeds Canada. But without further ado, here's my talk with Michael Harvey of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance. Michael, thank you for joining us on the webinar today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. Well, you've been very busy lately. You just got back from Washington with a strong message. Canada's agri-food sector doesn't just export, but it integrates. What did you hear on the ground that reinforced that message?
Look, I'd say first thing when you're down in Washington as a Canadian, you got to remember that they're not thinking about us all the time. That maybe the Canada-US relationship, we're thinking about it all the time and they're not. So we went into meetings with an awful lot of people who were pleasant, who had good feelings about Canada, who were happy to see us, but really don't think about the relationship with Canada. So I think the opportunity is to walk them through how the agri-food relationship works between Canada and the US and help them understand it better.
Yeah, that's key, is to sit down and sort of have that mutual understanding, make sure everybody's on the same page. And I know some Canadian leaders have expressed skepticism about relying on the US going forward and all that kind of stuff. And from your perspective, is that a realistic shift, or is it a cultural reaction that can maybe risk overlooking how deeply interwoven our economies really are?
So I think a lot of the rhetoric coming out of Washington in the last few months has led to a very normal Canadian defensive reaction. Sometimes that's an emotional reaction, and that's normal because we're talking about emotional things, our country, very important things. But I think once we go back to thinking about our reality, not just what we'd like our reality to be, but what our reality is, we're on a continent. And we're on a continent that we share with the United States. And there, the reality is the United States is a great neighbor, has been a great neighbor. Almost any country in the world would be very jealous of our geographic situation. And okay, maybe we're going through a period that's a little bit tougher with the rhetoric, but it's something we can work through. The geography is not going to change. The people change. People's positions change, but our geography is not going to change. So we got a reality there that we've got to deal with.
Now, we're going to be hearing from Lauren Cummin from Seeds Canada, and Seeds Canada just joined up with CAFTA as a friend of CAFTA. And I'm curious, we often silo seed from the broader agri-food conversation, but that's a big reason why Seeds Canada joined CAFTA, because seed is an integral part of that value chain. And I'm curious, why is it critical that our sector think of agri-food and its importance to what we do?
I think any element of the value chain only really makes sense if you look at the whole value chain, right? There's no point in seeds if you don't think about crops. They go together. Obviously, there's no point in crops if you don't think about seeds, right? At CAFTA, we take a broader approach. We include the food processors. We include the meats, the beef, pork. We include different crops, canola, cereals, pulses, grains. So what we're really looking at is the broader perspective of agri-food exporters. So we think it's great to have the seed perspective with us, to have you join. It's really by working together as a sector that we get the government's attention. And I think we need to work on it. Something that's been difficult over the years in Canada, if you look at the international trade issues, is everyone goes straight to dairy. Everyone goes straight to dairy thinking about issues with the United States. I think a lot of people think that dairy is the Canadian agri-food sector. That the Canadian agri-food sector has a certain perspective on issues. And the reality is it's much broader, Most of the sector depends on international trade, and we really need to get our views across to make sure that the government takes this into consideration.
Yeah, it's a very diverse industry, and you've said that trade diversification is great in theory, but geography is a reality. And I'm curious, what does practical diversification look like for Canadian agri-food, and how do we pursue that without sort of losing, I guess, what we like to think about as the North American advantage?
Well, I think first I'd say it's good in practice, not just in theory. But if what you think is that trade diversification is going to make up for the United States, then we're starting to move into the field of theory, right? The reality is we can strengthen ourselves by selling to different places around the world. There are big growing markets. If you look at places like Asia, that's getting richer and that really wants to import Canadian agri-food products. If you look at growing markets, look at in India that is, again, developing really quickly and is, I think they're already the top country in the world in terms of population, but quite a bit behind economically, but growing. Let's look at China, where we've had our difficulties, but let's face it, it's also a market that's so big for some commodities that there's just no way to replace it. It's a question of selling to China or selling less. So we, yes, want to diversify, and we put effort into that, but we also have to protect market share. And the two biggest markets in the world are the United States and China. And we've got to put as much or more effort into protecting market share in the big markets than in opening up new markets.
Yeah, exactly. And before I let you go, looking ahead, where do you see the biggest opportunities for Canada's agri-food exporters to lead, not just follow in shaping those future trade rules and partnerships that we're talking about today?
So I'd say first, let's look at this Canada-US relationship. Prime Minister Carney met with President Trump just a few days ago. Started on the personal relationship. Not sure how much changed in terms of the trade discussion, but a trade discussion is coming up. 2026 is the review of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, what we call CUSMA, what the Americans call USMCA. So there's a review. A review sometimes leads to a big negotiation. That would appear to be what President Trump wants. We really need to get Canadian agri-food exporters' views out there in this process to make sure the decisions aren't being taken without taking our views into consideration. Then I'd look at some other issues. Let's look at China. It might be time for a reset with China. Start a discussion. China has got food security issues that Canada can contribute to a lot, but we've had a terrible political run of it the last few years. New government, time for new discussions. India as well, where we've had a difficult run of it. But time for some new discussions. And then I'd say the international rules-based trading system, or the World Trade Organization, and the rules around that. So the United States appears to be backing away from that. At least in fact, they're making decisions on tariffs that are obviously outside of the World Trade Organization scope. They haven't said that they want to pull out exactly or something like that, but they're at least ignoring it right now. So for Canada, I guess plan A is to try to convince the United States to participate constructively in the World Trade Organization. And plan B is to do as much as we can to protect that world rules-based trading system, even if the U.S. is backing away for a few years, because the U.S. might come back. We want a path for that to happen. And the rest of the world wants to have a system of rules as well. So there's a lot of work for Canada to do protecting that system. So there's work for Canadian agri-food exporters to do, making sure our views are being taken into account.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot happening. I know things are set to resume in Parliament in Ottawa towards the end of the month. So it's going to be a very interesting time, and we will see what happens. But thank you, Michael, for your time today. It's been great to have your insights, and have a great day, sir.
Thank you, Mark. You too.
Thank you to Michael so much for his insights. I want to welcome, before we take a few questions and sign off for the day, I want to welcome Lauren Cummin, Policy Director for Seeds Canada to the stage. How are you today, Lauren?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to see you. And yeah, a lot going on today. I'm sure you've been paying attention to the goings on in Ottawa with the cabinet shuffle. Lots happening. And so, yeah, I just wanted to catch up with you. You are no stranger to our audience and talk to you about some of the things you're going to be doing. You're headed off to Washington yourself soon to the American Seed Trade Association's leadership summit. But I just want to back up a minute. And as I mentioned, Seeds Canada recently joined CAFTA, and you now engage with American Seed Trade Association and Seed Association of the Americas more closely than really you ever have. And I'm just curious, what does this growing web of international collaborations signal about the future of the seed trade and Canada's role in it?
Well, as we've talked a little bit about this before, Mark, and most of the seed that we produce here in Canada is used domestically, but we cannot choose to ignore international relationships. We do import virtually 100% of our garden seed. If it's not from the U.S., a lot of the time it makes its way through the U.S. We utilize contra-season nurseries, whether it's in the U.S. or South America or south of the U.S. We move seed back and forth, canola, corn, and soy all the time for treatment, for storage, for sale. So it is really important that we pay attention to these relationships, with our trading partners in the Americas. And so I think that's why you're seeing this renewed focus to partner and to work with groups like ASTA and SAA. Because we all have an interest in making sure that trade goes smoothly, that our policies are as aligned as possible. So it's not about one of us trying to one up the other. It's really about recognizing that we do need each other to work smoothly in our own countries. So it is a good partnership. With CAFTA, Michael talked a little bit about it. You don't have a crop without seed, and you wouldn't have a seed industry if we didn't have a cropping sector. So seed really is that first link, in the value chain, and farmers may not always think about access to seed, but seed trade disruptions impact seed and is going to trickle down to the farmer. Maybe not in the first year, but certainly in the second year they'll feel it. So I think it's just important to recognize the interconnectivity between the seed sector and cropping sector, as well as between Canada and our trading partners around the world.
I'm curious, talking about, going to Washington and meeting with people. I'm interested in this idea of soft diplomacy and, personal relationships, those hallway conversations. There's this old saying about, there's, meetings, formal meetings that happen in boardrooms, but the real business gets done, in the hallway, and it's those more informal conversations. And I'm just curious, in navigating complex issues like biotech policy and seed movement and regulatory alignment and all those things that you deal with, how important are those personal relationships?
I mean, they're critical. As someone who came into a national organization from a provincial organization and into a role that really does focus externally, as opposed to a more internal facing research role, what is most important is knowing who to ask when you have a question. And if you don't have these relationships, you're kind of helpless. So it's important that you build these relationships with colleagues here in Canada, with colleagues internationally, so that when you have a challenge, you can tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I'm hoping you can connect me with the person who can give me this information." And of course, it's equally important to be a resource to them. So I think we have established that trusted relationship between each other, and going to these meetings like Seed of the Americas Association meetings and ASTA meetings really helps to build those relationships. It's where we we sort of talk shop and get to know each other, and talk about some of the challenges that we have. So it goes both ways. It's important that if I'm going to be asking for help, that I'm ready to step up and help them as well. So that's really where the magic happens, is in these hallway discussions.
United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, USMCA, or CUSMA, as we talk about it here in Canada. As Michael said, that's under more scrutiny as we look towards 2026. And what are you watching most closely when it comes to seed movement and IP, and how do we need to prepare for any potential changes, do you think?
Mm-hmm. So, CUSMA is supposed to be a review, but as Michael mentioned, it kind of sounds like it's going to be a little bit bigger than that. So, of course, we're going to be paying attention to what happens. Sometimes seed is an afterthought in these discussions. The main attention is spent on cropping, commodity crops and animal agriculture. But talking to our counterparts within the CUSMA arrangement, we all really want to see free trade of seed, because we recognize how integrated our sectors are. So we're going to certainly be talking to each other and working on alignment of our advocacy efforts to make sure that seed, we don't accidentally lose something that the negotiators maybe aren't thinking about or isn't top of mind, and that our positions are only strengthened. In terms of intellectual property, we're fairly well aligned with the U.S. But the U.S. has, in their trade estimates report, brought up non-tariff trade barriers that do impact the seed sector. So it'll be interesting to see if they push for any resolution there, or if that's sort of a minor issue compared to what their real focus is on.
Yeah, time will tell. No, thank you so much, Lauren, for your insights. And I'm just going to bring Jeff and Leif back to the stage. We'll have a quick Q&A again to our audience. If you have a question, just type it into the chat box. I was just curious, Lauren, as I said, you are probably keeping up to date today with the goings-on in Ottawa. Our new Ag Minister, Heath MacDonald, I'm going to have to ask him to be on our next webinar. He is a Prince Edward Island MP, sorry. Lauren, any initial impressions? Have you ever spoken with Heath?
No, Heath is a new face to us. I understand he's had roles in the PEI Legislative Assembly, both in economic development and tourism, as well as Minister of Finance. So, obviously we were very excited with the prospect of having Cody back. And I think you could hear throughout the video that you played of your interview that he has a lot of passion for the seed sector. We were really looking forward to working with that passion to try to make some gains. Again, don't want to prejudge anything. Hopefully, Heath will have that same passion. We'll have to get to know him. He will have to get to know agriculture. But hopefully we do make some progress over the next few years.
Yeah, there will be a lot going on, and like I say, it was great to have Cody on, and thank you again, Cody, for taking the time to speak with me. I was wondering, Leif, in terms of the GATE initiative, this is a big deal. What's next for GATE?
Well, right now the project has been announced, and a big part of getting something built is having the funds to do so. So we were really excited to hear the Manitoba government's announcement last month. I think with a new ag minister and a new government, there's some discussions to be had with the federal government as to how they can contribute to help support the cereal sector and and our success internationally. And then lastly is working with our capital campaign cabinet, a group of eminent individuals who are helping attract investment from the private sector and agriculture to bring that last piece together. So we've got growers and government and in the rest of the industry all contributing to this common goal.
Jeff, the Gates Initiative, like I say, this is a big initiative, could stand to have a big impact on Canadian cereals. And what could something like this mean for an organization like CCAN?
Yeah, well, I think, when you look at the seed industry in Canada, and again, wheat, for example, we've always been really focused on that quality aspect, right? So the fact that we can now, this really helps us to kind of round out the whole circle in terms of the breeding activities and connecting those right with the end user. And we know ourselves that when farmers have more dollars in their pocket, they invest in newer and better seed. And but that all has to begin with having the demand for the end use of your product. So this is really a game changer, I think, for demand creation for Canadian grain. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you, everyone, Lauren and Jeff and Leif, for your time. Thank you again to Cody and Michael for giving of their time as well. I just want to remind our audience that a recording of this will be available on seedworld.com in the coming hours. Thank you again to our webinar sponsor, CCAN, for their support. And thanks again to our audience for spending your lunch hour with us. Lauren, Jeff, Leif, have a great day.
Thanks,
Mark.
And to our audience as well, have a great day. This is Mark Zinkowitz, editor for Seed World Canada, signing off. Take care, everybody.